Hello, welcome back to my channel, and this is the book that we're going to be talking about today, Stephen King's If It Bleeds. Stephen King, good stuff. I love Stephen King. Stephen King is one of my favorite writers. He's just great. He's a great storyteller. He's not overly concerned with anything other than telling a good story. You can just sort of tell that the man loves to tell a good story, and he seems to just get some just genuine personal satisfaction and pleasure out of writing a good story, and that's what I love about him most. I think that he's a storyteller first and foremost. And there's this sort of everyman quality about him that just radiates out of his work. So like, you'll get characters that you get insights with their thoughts and with their actions and with their words that just you recognize instantly. Like he's an everyman, you know. He's very relatable, very down to earth, and that quality really comes through with his writing. So anyway, Stephen King, really good stuff. And this book is his latest book. It just came out a couple of weeks ago, I think, or maybe like a week or two ago. And it's four stories. Excuse me, four stories. Yeah, four stories. I'm looking at the table of contents here. It's four different, short stories, but they're not super short. They're actually like novella style or novella length, especially the one story, If It Bleeds, the title story, which is a detective story that features a character that he has used before in previous books, in his mystery books, Mr. Mercedes, and also End of Watch, and there's that whole series that he has where, and the character's name is Holly Gibney. She's a private investigator who's quirky, and she's I think she's on the autism, she's somewhere on the autism spectrum, but she's like she has like a really high functioning like capacity to deduct from clues and arrive at like she's just a really good private investigator, and so she's a fun character, and she's featured in this book, in that particular story. But the book doesn't start off with that story. The book starts off with a story called Mr. Harrigan's Phone, which is sort of like this I don't know, there's something about Stephen King's work recently that is, and maybe it's not even recent, maybe it's been coming for a long time, but he softens up the horror with this human element that it's almost like he's not really concerned with the horror anymore, although he does seem to have this sort of like giddy delight in the macabre, but the focus isn't the macabre, and he's never mean-spirited with his work. The horror is never like mean-spirited or brutal. It can be there, but it's also it's almost always redeemed by this quality of beauty, sadness, humor. There's always something to lighten the mood with Stephen King, and I've noticed that lately. Mr. Harrigan's Phone is about this boy who goes to work for this old man, this rich old man who lives by himself in a mansion, and he goes and the old man wants the boy to read to him for like an hour a day, during the week, and he's paying him to like just read him classic works of literature like later Lady Chatterley's Lover and I mean, not to read too much into that specific title because it's not what you think. Like the father isn't the father of the little boy actually suspects that maybe this guy is like a weird, you know, pedophile or something, and so he makes sure that that isn't going on. But that's not the case. This isn't like some creepy predator type of situation. But what is happening is they are developing a friendship. The old man, who really doesn't connect with anyone, is forming this friendship with this little boy, and the boy also is forming fond feelings of the old man, and it's kind of touching. It's a beautiful and odd little friendship that they have, but then a phone, the iPhone, and I should mention that this story takes place, I believe, in 2007 or 2004. I'm not sure when, but it's when the first iPhone came out. So it's a really interesting time setting because it's not too distant past, but it's distant enough, and technology has advanced enough that it seems like it was a long time ago, because you know, there's only a certain amount of apps that are on the phone, and there it has limited capabilities and all this good stuff, and so it's kind of fun to read about like that time period that we lived in, you know, and realize just how far we've come technologically. So this boy gets an iPhone, and I won't tell you any more than that. There's going to be no spoilers in this because I believe that part of the fun, well, definitely, of course, part of the fun is like finding out where these stories go. Because, and he talks, actually, Stephen King talks about that in his author's note at the end of the book. He says, like, part of the fun for him, I think he said, was seeing where these stories go. Like, the stories reveal themselves to him. They don't, you know, they're not all right there when he starts. He sort of like has to see where these stories will go, and stories will go where stories go. And so there is that sort of quality here of like just, I don't want to say meandering, but you get the sense that Stephen King isn't out to prove something. He doesn't have to prove anything. He's just he's writing about situations and characters that he finds interesting, and he's just giving them room to breathe and to live on the page and see where they go from there. And I think that's a beautiful way to write, and it comes across as really like effortless and easy to read and really fascinating and fun. So I will say that they're almost all of the stories, well, actually all of the stories have horror elements to them. So they would be classified as horror, and they're obviously, with the cover like this, marketed as horror. But they're not just horror. There's something more going on here. There's like, like I said, with this first novel, it's kind, or with this first story, it's about friendship, and it's about intergenerational like friendships and relationships, and class differences, and the relationship between the little boy and his father, and technological advancements, and nostalgia in a weird way. It's nostalgia for like 2004. So it's just a really fun read. And so don't go into it thinking that you're going to get this like dark, disturbing horror. There is some of that, but there's also a lot more to recommend it. There's a sort of wonder and awe about life and the world and people. The next story is called The Life of Chuck. And perhaps what I was just saying about the thematic elements of these stories, like there's no better example than The Life of Chuck, because The Life of Chuck, to me, is one of the most, it's very experimental in a weird way. Like it's a probably his most experimental story that I've ever read by him. And I haven't read everything by him, but I have read a lot by Stephen King. But this story is really interesting. It starts at the end. It's broken up into 3 acts, and it starts with Act 3 and then works its way forward to Act 1. Now I'm going to describe Act 3, not the whole thing, but I'll set it up, and then I'll describe a little bit of Act 2, and then I will leave Act 1 to you. Okay, so Act 3, and by the way, no spoilers here either. I don't believe in spoilers, especially when it comes to Stephen King books. Act 3 is this apocalyptic story, and it's really actually weird to read it right now during coronavirus because it's very timely, and it's really eerie how it evokes some of the feelings of like paranoia and fear and sort of like this free-for-all quality to society. So the world is kind of like crumbling, and no one's sure what the heck is going on. Like, there's all these storms going on and earthquakes, I think they mentioned, and just society is like literally falling apart at the seams because people aren't going to work anymore. It's just like this weird sort of like I don't know, it sort of feels like now, but a more extreme version of now. It's like, what the fuck do we do? So there's this weird quality to it that's very eerie, and it's apocalypse. So you're reading that, and you're reading about this character who he's going around kind of like looking at everything that's going on. He's seeing all these things going on, and he's I believe he's married. He married and divorced. They're separated. They live separately, and so he is freaking out about everything that's happening. But what really sets him off is he starts to notice that this billboard there. First there's a billboard, and the billboard has this picture of this like accountant looking guy, this middle-aged accountant looking guy, and his name is Chuck, and it says something like, thanks for your service, or 39 great years, thanks Chuck. And it's like, it's a weird billboard because it's like, who is Chuck? What is he? What's the whole point of that billboard? And in the middle of this like global event, apocalyptic event, it's sort of like it takes on this odd, like almost surreal quality. People sort of look up to Chuck as like this weird sort of like metaphysical creation, or this weird like supernatural omen of sorts. And we don't know what Chuck is. We don't know. We just know that the world is ending. This weird stuff's going on, and in the middle of it is like Chuck. And then he starts appearing everywhere. He's on signs. He's on it as things get worse through this thing. This sign of Chuck starts popping up everywhere. So there's an interesting, like, really weird, surreal quality to it. So anyway, that's Act 1. And then in Act 2, we are introduced to Chuck and who Chuck is and what the backstory is there. And I'll just say this. I won't give away anymore, but I will just say that there's a metaphysical, spiritual quality to the themes of this story that really are quite fascinating, and they really spoke to me on a personal level, because I think Stephen King, I would venture to say, based on his author's note, that he has a certain notion of the way the universe works and the way reality works. And that notion is sort of based in metaphysics, spirituality, and a sort of faith in like a larger something, a cosmic, larger, I don't know what the word is, like just a bigger something than what we see in the here and now. But that notion really is, I think a lot of people have it. I think a lot of people sense it. They sense that there is something more. They sense their own. I know in my life personally, there are moments in life where you sort of transcend your own mundane existence and you sort of sense like there's something there just beyond the veil, and it's larger than you can fathom, but you do sense it, and it's hard to give voice to it. It's hard to verbalize it, but um yeah, I think this story does a good job of describing that. Like when you find out what's really going on, you kind of like go, ah, yeah, I get it. I get what he's going for there. I see what he's saying. And it's not perfectly delineated. It's not perfectly every single aspect of this sort of like theological notion is not spelled out for you, but it doesn't have to be. You sort of get the poetry of it, you get the sense of it. And in that sense, it's a really beautiful story. It's really beautiful and really sad and a little disturbing, but mostly it's a beautiful kind of like trippy story. So that's the life of Chuck. The next story that we get is If It Bleeds. I'm not a huge fan of Stephen King's mystery type stuff, and I know Holly Gibney is one of his, if not his favorite character that he's written, but and I do like her as a character, but he sort of loses me a little bit when he gets into the mystery stuff and the investigations and there is like with his book The Outsider, there's a definite horror and supernatural element to it, so he's sort of blending genres. Like there's the mystery thriller genre and then there's the supernatural horror genre, and he sort of blends them together in really fascinating and cool ways. But I don't know why it doesn't quite get me the way some of his other stuff does. So that I think I already talked about that novella, and that by the way is a larger chunk of the book. If I could isolate it, I would show you just what that looks like, because it is a big chunk of the book. Let me see if I can one-handedly grab it and show you what it is. Okay, so oh, I'm doing this to my book. Okay, so you can see this is the whole book. Those are two stories right there. And then this chunk in the middle that I'm holding is the one story, If It Bleeds. The next story is Rat. And you can see the stories are separated with a title page. Rat, I liked Rat. Rat was a cool story. In a way, I feel like we've read some of these stories before. I know that certain concepts have definitely come have been written about before in horror fiction. For example, Mr. Harrigan's Phone. I won't tell you exactly what, but I think you'll recognize it when you see it. It's this idea of supernatural communication. I'll just leave it at that because I don't think that gives anything too much away. But so supernatural communication in Mr. Harrigan's Phone, and then also you have this concept in Rat of a sort of bargain with the devil type of situation. And that of course has been written about before. So Rat has this there's this it's a story about this guy. He's a writer, struggling writer. He struggles to come up with ideas and there's this weird backstory that he has. He's married, he has kids, he's a family man, and I think he does something else for a living. Writing is not his primary mode of income or method of income. Um, but he loves it, and he envisions for himself like this future of being this world renowned like great writer. And he just has this passion for it, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that can relate. I can relate to that. But everyone around him is a little bit like skeptical. They're a little bit like, especially his wife, and you get the sense that he doesn't take things very well, because there's this odd like the wife is like hesitant to let him write. She's like, is this gonna be like last time? And it's never really spelled out what happened last time, but you get the sense that it wasn't good, and that he suffered some sort of like a mental breakdown because of his struggle to write his material. So he gets an idea for a western, and he wants to go out to his to a cabin in the woods basically, and he wants to get away from his family and write this story. So he tells his wife, "Hey, I got this idea." And she's really reluctant. She's like, "Oh no, like another one." Like, but she's also supportive, she allows it, but she makes him take precautions. She's like, "Okay, you have to call me as soon as you get there. Call me every day." She like is really like on him, and he's like understanding about it, but as time progresses, he gets more and more annoyed, and you sense like there's this like scratchy like element of I don't know, there's something there, and it's festering and it's growing, and there's like this dark center to him, because he comes across as like this average really nice guy, but you do get the sense that there's something buried under there that if you just dig through the layers a little bit, it'll be exposed. And sure enough, it is exposed by nothing less than a rodent, a rat. And I'll leave it at that. So that is the book, Stephen King's If It Bleeds. It's fun, it's engaging. I didn't like, my least favorite was the Holly Gibney story, the title story, If It Bleeds. But that's just my personal thing. You those stories are wildly popular, and people have really taken to his work in the thriller mystery genre. So and the way he blends supernatural with traditional sort of like police procedural thriller investigation type stuff. So people probably more people probably like it than don't. So yeah, that's Stephen King's If It Bleeds. It's a fun book to read, to sort of hole up with right now during this period of social distancing, and I highly recommend it.